Lord God, thank you for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about looking at your word. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we're going to look at the time between Easter and Pentecost, and we're going to look at what's going on in the four Gospels and in Acts. It's sort of parallel what I'm preaching. So, there'll be, if you hear the sermon, this gives a little more background. If you don't hear the sermons, it tells you the whole shooting match. Okay. But what we're going to do today is we're going to start by looking at the resurrection or the Easter stories in each of the four Gospels, because we've got slightly different accounts. And to do this, we've got to be on a certain, I think, we need to be on a certain intellectual level. Certain intellectual level. Well, Art, you may leave if you don't feel challenged by this.
No, I think you're all challenged compared to what I have.
This is, I want you to think of the Three Little Pigs.
Okay.
Okay, the Three Little Pigs. Now, when you're looking at the Three Little Pigs, not actually looking at them, looking at the story, what is the lesson or the meaning of the Three Little Pigs? What do you think is the lesson of the Three Little Pigs?
Nothing.
Stronger house.
What's that?
Build a stronger house.
Okay, build a stronger. Let's broaden it out a little bit more. So what would you want if you were telling this to a child? What do you want the child to take away from the story?
The different houses that build out of certain things don't work.
Okay, so that's true. So what is the point? We're going to talk about the story itself in just a minute. But what would be the point?
The strength.
Okay, it has something to do with strength. Okay, what are we talking about? What if you're saying this to a 3-year-old? What do you want that 3-year-old gauge, for instance? What do you want that 3-year-old to take away from the story? What's the meaning?
I think God.
You do something right the first time. I don't know if I'm on the right track.
Well,
but yeah, you do it right. You don't do it shoddy. You do it right. It's you're going to be protected in the long run.
Okay, if you
find a strong shelter.
Okay, if you do it right, you'll be protected. So doing it right is the right thing to do. Doing it well is the right thing to do. Okay, and I'm not saying that there could be a whole bunch of different meanings, but let's focus on that one a little bit. Now, tell me the story real quick.
With Gage. Gage is going to shoot the wolf.
Gage is going to shoot the wolf. Hold that.
Yeah,
Tell me the story of the three pigs. What's the story of how does it go?
Walking down the street.
This is going to be a long one.
It's going to be
they're
long.
walking down the street. In a nutshell, anybody other than Art, give me the three pigs in a nutshell.
Three little pigs are accosted by the big bad wolf. One little pig builds a house out of sticks. Wolf goes in, or builds a house out of straw. I'm sorry, the wolf. He goes in there to hide. The wolf blows the house down. Goes up to the second pig. He builds a house out of sticks. Wolf blows the house down.
No, sticks you said both times.
Well, he shifted it to straw.
My fault.
Yeah.
It's last little pig built out of brick, and the wolf couldn't blow it down, so he was safe.
And let's call that a stuck in the mud moment. just a little bit. But that's okay, John. I am now used as an adjective when somebody Rudiger's it. That's not a good thing.
I got Rudiger.
Yeah, you got Rudiger.
There was somebody on television last night, and that's what his last name was, Rudiger.
Really? Most when you see a Rudiger on television, it's usually a former Nazi.
No, it wasn't about that.
Okay. Well, anyway. Okay. So we've got do your job right, and you've got the little pigs and the wolf, and you can do. Okay. Now, that's the story. If you got a point, the point is do the job right, and things will come out well. Now, what if we change the point you want to convey? In other words, the point you want, we're going to use the same idea of three little pigs and the wolf and the houses and all, but this time the point is that you want to convey is, depending on the job, the time spent and the money spent may be more important than quality. The time and the money spent may be more important than quality. Now you're using the same story of the three little pigs. Tell it to me.
But you're saying
It's a
quality.
challenge.
Okay, well, tell me what the story would look like if the point is, instead of do it right the first time and you're safe, now the point is sometimes, it's more important to do things fast than to spend a lot of time and money doing it.
Because the pigs built so many houses out of straw, the wolf ran out of breath blowing them all down, so he couldn't get to them all. So you built a whole bunch of straw houses.
Okay, you build a lot, the three pigs all built straw houses really fast.
Yes.
And so the wolf couldn't get into any of them.
Well, he just blew a couple down, so they lost a few, but he couldn't find where they were all hiding because there were so many.
So many houses, so they could sort of hide away.
Yes.
Okay?
Oh, the wolf felt bad, so he went out and he built a bunch of brick houses for the pigs so nobody else would hurt them.
So this was a federal program.
Yeah.
That he's building some brick houses for the pigs. Okay, all right.
But they were kind of crappy because they were.
That's right. So they actually.
They spent a lot of money on it. They weren't high quality.
So the straw house was actually a better quality than the brick because they bought the brick from somebody's nephew who has connections
The pigs were
and
good, but the building was from the lowest bidder.
from the lowest bidder. Okay, who didn't pay the subcontractors? Yes. So that changes the story a little bit. What if the point that you're conveying by the story is persistence is the key to success?
Of course.
I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Persistence is the key to success. Shape the three little pigs to make that point.
Everything up to the brick house is the same, except knowing that the pigs would have to come out of the house eventually, the wolf just waited to eat them.
Just waited them out.
Waited them out.
Sort of a siege.
Yes.
Prevented slop from coming in.
But what if
They gotta come outside, I won't have to go in now.
what if you were the fox and you went
Just like
to
an
the
Apache.
the brick house first?
Okay.
And the other ones are happy because they're in their own houses, but he went to them. So he had more energy there.
Okay.
And he could knock it down.
Okay, so he focused his
Yeah,
attention
exactly.
and his energy on that one house.
Yeah.
Okay. What if the point is it is better to try and fail
Then to never try to look
at all?
That's it.
So wouldn't that still come into a challenge?
Okay.
Challenging yourself to
Okay.
go further, to protect yourself.
Okay, so tell me, put that into the story. You're challenging yourself to do even better.
You're
Don't know
challenged.
what you're capable of until you try.
And then you know what you can't do also.
Like build out of sticks.
I'm thinking like the guy,
You're still
the
determined.
pig that built out of bricks, he was laying this incredibly solid foundation and had steel beams to support his house. Unfortunately, he was putting up the beams when the wolf showed up, and since he didn't have any protection at all, the wolf said, "The heck with the straw and the sticks. This is a pig. There's nothing to blow down."
No.
Oh, okay, now I get it.
Yeah,
Now
okay.
you're talking about a strong foundation for the church.
Yeah, well, okay, now you've taken it in another direction. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the point is, we got one story, and you modified that one story to make different points, and we're going to see the same thing in the four gospel accounts. What they're doing is they're taking an account, right? A story. And what is, in a nutshell, give me the Easter story. Tell me, just share it. Without looking at the sheet here. I don't want you reading this. That would be cheating. Tell me just offhand what you know about the Easter story. Just tell me the story of Easter.
Jesus came to town, they killed him, and he was 3 days later, he left.
Okay, well, Art started his story. These guys were walking down the street, which was going to be a little long. Yours is a little on the brief side.
Yeah.
Let's shoot for something in between you, Sandy and Art.
In between us.
Just something in between you,
Okay, somebody else go.
Okay, let's fill in. Sandy.
What?
Good response.
You
Good
said,
response.
You said nutshell.
No, good response. That was a nutshell, right? The accent on the nut. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's flesh, and that's sort of nut theme too. Flesh out Sandy's account. Give me the Easter story. What you know about the Easter, give me the Easter story.
She put it in the best perspective.
Well, let's do a little more than he shows up.
No, he came to town.
He came to town. Let's do a little better than that.
Down for Passover.
Okay, what is going on? We're talking about crucifixion's over,
Yeah.
right?
Oh.
We're talking about resurrection.
Oh, well,
That's the resurrection
But
story.
after the crucifixion.
Okay,
So what it proved,
John is starting to move his hands, which means we're starting.
His
He's
mind.
taken down, he's put in the tomb, and 3 days later, when they go to check on him, he's gone. He's risen.
Okay.
They didn't-
And they're told that he is risen, or he has been risen, and that's Easter.
Okay, that's Easter. Anything to add?
I was gonna say, Paul did it perfectly
Okay.
in Corinthians. I'm gonna read it to you. Let's see. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12.
Yeah, he said,
Okay, but that's a pretty basic story, right? Now, if we look at, and that's not different than what John said, if we look at that very basic story, you've fired her up. Yeah.
I did say
We
that.
weren't allowed to
All right.
Well, yes,
Oh,
no,
she's
no,
reading
no.
another. He's
It's
reading
like
another
reading
sheet.
different notes.
Yeah, different notes. All right. Now, what would be the point if this sort of basic story? What do you think is the meaning? What's the point behind what y'all shared?
there are many ways to solve a problem, but until we find the right one, they've got to be tested.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'm thinking of a more religious sounding. What you said is good, but I'm thinking in terms of the theology. What's the point of just what you shared?
Just what Rick said. You don't know. All you know that he's gone. You don't know how, when, where, why. You don't know the basic questions. He could have been stolen. Is what
Well,
they
but do you
first
think
thought.
Paul? I mean, suggesting that he may have been stolen?
No.
No. What? Okay, I know what you're saying, but in terms of what a Christian would, if you just walk into a church at Easter,
Yeah.
and you know this basic bare bone story. Jesus died, he was put in a tomb, 3 days later he rose, women showed up, they were told that he wasn't here anymore, he was raised, and that's the Easter story.
How do you
What would it hold on that, because I don't want to get on a tangent yet. What would be the point of that story? If that's the way I told it, what would be the point? To a Christian.
But he still lives.
Okay, the point would be, Jesus lives, right?
He defeated
It
it.
was
Okay, that he defeated death.
Well, the
No.
one thing is he was persecuted alone.
Okay, that he was persecuted alone.
It was written, it had to be.
Okay, it was written. All of those are great, right? Because that gives you an interpretation of this very bare bone story. But what we're going to see when we look at what the evangelists do is they do more than just present this bare bone story. And the reason I gave you the sheets is as we go through it, there's something I want you to do. And if you can write it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. We're going to look at these 4 accounts, and we're going to use the same version. And what I want you to do is I want you to think, and you can't really do this until we do the second one. I want you to think about the similarities in the stories. You can use this bare bone story we just talked about. Jesus put in a tomb, women showed up, he's gone. They're told that he's risen, and we're off and running. That would be use that as a basis. How this story, how the accounts fit into that. But then I want you to just think about unique features. What are some things in this particular story in Matthew and the story in Mark and Luke that's really unique to them? You know, what is unusual, kind of surprising, outside of that standard? And then at the end, we're going to look at what lesson these four writers may be trying to make in the way they shape this very basic story. Yeah, Art?
I wanted to ask, you keep saying 3 days, but they don't know if he arose as soon as they put him in there. How do we know that for sure, that he didn't get away until the third day?
You know why that's would probably be the case?
No.
Is the Jews considered a 3-day waiting period to make sure a person was dead. In other words, we're talking about ancient folks that might bury people that weren't really dead. And what the Jews believed is that you couldn't be absolutely sure that a person was dead. And they talked about soul getting ready to go to Sheol and stuff, that there was still a connection between body and soul for 3 days after you put them in a hole. And after 3 days, you could say they are dead. Well, of course you could, because if they didn't die 3 days before, they were sure as heck dead now. And what it ensured that, the person wasn't going to come back. Evidently, there must have been enough people that they pronounced dead, and 8 hours later, woke up because they really weren't dead. They had passed out or something. So that's why they did 3 days.
So
3 days
That
becomes
was
kind
still
of
a
important.
tradition up to modern
Yeah,
time, up
yeah.
until recently. when
Right.
it
So
came
that's
to-
probably the 3 days.
The Jewish people
funerals.
sit Shiva. They have to put him in the ground as soon as possible.
Right.
As soon as possible.
Right.
And then they sit for a week on orange crates.
Well, the key is that 3-day period. When Lazarus was buried, it was 3 days. He'd been in there 3 days. And so the 3 becomes really significant. That meant that both with Jesus and him, by custom, they were considered dead. So could he have risen right away? Well, there were people that said maybe he swooned and wasn't really dead. But that's why they said 3 days. Because 3 days he was dead. He would have been dead. But that's why the 3 days becomes kind of important. Okay, so let's look at Mark. Why are we looking at Mark first?
Because it's the earliest.
It's probably the earliest account. Okay, so you've got it in front of you. I'm going to read it because I love to hear my own voice.
Oh, we all do.
As well, you should. And then the Sabbath and when the Sabbath had passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint the body. And very early on the first day after the Sabbath, they went to the tomb after sunrise, and they said among themselves, "Who will roll away for us the stone from the door of the tomb?" And when they looked up, they saw the stone was rolled away, for it was very large. And when they went into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, and he was wearing a white robe. And they were utterly amazed. But he said to them, "Don't be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. See the place where they lay him. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." And the women fled from the tomb, for they were seized with trembling and bewilderment. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Okay, that's the resurrection account. Now, when does this? Just looking at the Mark, when does it occur?
Easter.
Okay, well, we're looking at the passage. So
It happens after the Sabbath, which is on a Sunday.
okay,
for
so the Sabbath is passed, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and who shows up? Who's there?
Mary Magdalene.
Okay, Mary Magdalene,
And Mary the mother of...
Mary the mother of James, and Salome, right? And what do they bring? They bring spices, and why are they bringing spices?
To anoint
To anoint the body. And anointing the body means,
Cleaning.
yeah, kind of cleaning and,
Probably keep the smell down.
yeah, that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, why was it necessary that they anoint the body? Because Jesus had what?
He died.
Yeah, he just died on the crucifixion.
They
Now-
also, they gave him that same thing but they gave them at his birth too. The wise men.
Oh, right. Well,
Right.
you're right. Yes, but that's that's Matthew. So,
Well,
yeah. Okay, so they arrive at the tomb, right? And when do they get there?
Right after dawn.
Okay, they get
Very
there
early.
right after sunrise. And what's the concern?
Who's gonna move?
Getting the rock.
Okay.
Getting the rock moved.
They are there. The concern is they can't get in because there's this big hulking rock in front of the tomb, right? Oh, okay. So that's their concern. What do they see?
It's already moved.
Okay, they see that the stone has already been moved away, right? And this, how do they react to that?
Shocked.
Okay, they are really shocked, right? And what is the reason for them being shocked?
Because it's heavy. And
They're
it was-
wondering
Yeah,
if somebody entered into the tomb.
Yeah, well, it's a huge stone, right? That's what he said. Okay. And Mark mentions the size, that it was very, very large. And so what do? When they see it moved away, what do?
they run right into the hole.
Okay, they go into the tomb. And when they go into the tomb, what do they see?
Another guy sitting on the side.
Okay, they see a guy, and how is he described?
And a white robe.
He's wearing a white robe,
And a
old guy, young guy?
Young guy.
Okay, he's a young guy. Where is he sitting?
Like
On
To the left.
Well, he's on the right side. Okay, of the right side. Right side of what?
The
Of the tomb.
Okay, he's sort of on the right side of the tomb. And how would you explain his appearance? I mean, what?
Angelic.
Okay, kind of angelic, but he's not called an angel, right?
No.
He's called a young man wearing a white robe, which would sort of indicate, that maybe there's
Oh,
some
yeah.
kind of heavenly
Oh.
collection, Okay, now they see him, they certainly think he's something special, right? Or different, because what's their reaction?
They're amazed.
Okay, they are amazed or terrified. It's the same kind of Greek word. What does he say to them?
Said, don't be afraid.
Okay, don't be afraid. And then what?
Don't be
Yes,
amazed.
Jesus.
Okay, they are seeking Jesus of Nazareth.
Well, first he
right?
says, don't be amazed.
Don't be amazed, right? Because that's what they are. You're seeking, and how is this Jesus identified? Jesus of Nazareth,
Who was
the young man
crucified.
identifies.
The one who was
One-
crucified.
The one who was crucified.
Right.
Okay. Now, by Mark putting that in, or the guy saying Jesus, the one that was crucified, what do you think the writer is doing by having the young man say this? You're seeking Jesus of Nazareth, the one who's crucified.
Identifying.
Okay, identifying him and identifying him with
death. and-
with crucifixion.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's pulling us back to what happened,
Weren't
right?
the other two on either side also crucified?
Okay, but he doesn't mention that. He doesn't say anything about it. Yeah, yes, but he doesn't mention that.
No.
Okay, so the one who was crucified, and notice in if you're into like English grammar, which we all are,
Yes,
right?
That's what we speak.
What is the voice of the verb?
Past tense.
It's
What you talking about?
it is
Raised?
past, but it's also passive, right?
Yes.
What,
Which-
raised?
Well, it was
we
the
talk-
one. Wait, hold just a minute.
Which
The
verb we
one who
talking
was
about?
crucified, right?
Oh, that's
was
past
crucified is
Past
passive, right? Which means what? If it's passive,
Somebody done it to him.
somebody did it to him. Okay, so somebody was involved with this
Yeah.
crucifixion.
Yeah.
It tells them, don't be amazed. Now, if the women are faithful, and this guy at the tomb talks about seeking Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified, and he says, don't be amazed, we would expect women of faith to,
Not-
Except
well, would we, if a guy in the tomb says, don't be amazed, if you're faithful, a human being would be amazed, regardless.
Yeah.
But if he's showing their faith, if somebody
They would
who's a
be.
representative of God says, don't be amazed, then
You wouldn't be amazed.
you wouldn't be amazed, right? If you're a faithful person. You know, if God says, don't be amazed, you don't go,
Well, they-
ah!
Well,
Right?
they certainly
calm
knew
about it.
what the story was, so they weren't really truly faithful yet, because
Okay.
they were expecting to see him.
Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out that they weren't faithful at all.
Yeah, okay.
So we'd expect them to kind of calm down, right? You know. And what does the young man tell them?
That he has been raised.
Okay, again,
He's not
And it's not
here.
here.
you know, he's not here.
See,
That he was,
tell the
that he has been raised, which again is
Passive.
passive
Somebody
voice,
did it.
which means somebody
Did it
did it. He didn't do it
himself.
Jesus didn't rise from the dead. He was
Raised.
by God.
he was raised from the dead. So somebody else did it, and who is that somebody?
God.
Okay, we got God doing it. Now, this is
But it's
okay.
implied. It's
Implied.
not. But
Implied.
you got to take a leap here.
Well, yeah, although who else would have raised him?
Angels.
Well,
They don't have that power.
I don't know.
Okay.
That, I don't. know
Yeah, they
if would-
probably, often in Greek, it's called, and we don't see it at the first one, when the passive for crucified, but often in Greek, when you see the passive used, they call it the divine passive. And the implied, and it is implied, but it was something that the Greeks kind of accepted. The implied actor is the divine, is God. So was raised.
Why wouldn't they have put that in there?
I don't
wouldn't- why wouldn't they,
know. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't say raised by God, but he didn't. But I think the implication is relatively clear. Maybe we could question it, but in Greek you probably wouldn't,
Okay.
you know, if you were back then. Okay, so he was raised in, and certainly since we know the story, that's what's
Well, yeah,
being
we know.
inferred. Yeah.
We know.
Okay,
Now,
and then what does he tell him to do?
To look
Go
where
and
they-
tell Peter.
Okay, to go and tell Peter.
That he's on his way to Galilee.
Well, the disciples and Peter. Kind of interesting.
Why did they call out Peter?
Yeah, he said, why might he, and we're going to run into this again, why would he say, tell the disciples and Peter?
Well, Peter's going to be the one who starts a church.
Well,
So he knows that. I'm
okay,
sure.
well, that's going to, yeah.
And
Wants him to
he's
be a witness
he's the
of what
head
he's
honcho.
preaching.
Now, the point you're making, that's an excellent point if we're using the Gospel of Luke. Because the story of the early church is going to be all in Luke. With Mark just ending here, why do you think he would say the disciples and Peter?
Didn't Peter deny him twice?
That's it.
So Peter's probably feeling pretty bad about himself at this point, so hey, and tell Peter.
Yes. Well, think of the three that among the disciples. They reacted. Those disciples reacted in three ways, right? What were the three ways?
They denied him.
One denied,
One betrayed.
one betrayed, and the rest
Scattered.
ran away. And he says, "Go and tell the ones who ran away. Go and tell the ones who denied."
And
That's it.
That's right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, that's
No.
because Judas is dead.
Well, not in Mark. Judas doesn't, there's no mention of Judas's death in Mark. So it may be Mark's subtle way to say that there's kind of a reconciliation between Jesus and the ones who ran away and the one who denied. But maybe there isn't a reconciliation for the one who betrayed. Because remember, he also says, the one who betrays me, better for him to be cast into the sea, and that kind of jazz. Okay, but anyway, they say, go and tell the disciples, right? And Peter, to do what?
Tell him that he's on his way to Galilee.
To go ahead, he's going to Galilee, and he's going to
Meet him there.
meet him there. Okay. So, and this is something that Jesus said in the 14th chapter, that he was going after he was raised, he's going to Galilee. And now, the women, you said if the women were really, really faithful, had a more mature faith, when the guy in the tomb says, calm down, don't be amazed, they would have calmed down. And if the guy in the tomb says, go and tell the disciples and Peter to go to Galilee, because that's where Jesus is going to meet him, we would expect them to do what?
follow directions.
We would expect them to follow directions, right?
Yeah.
We all know women can't do that.
Well, These, oh,
Like men.
yeah, women may not, but men aren't even going to look at the directions. We don't need the directions. We already know how to do it. So, actually, if it had been a man, the man, after the young guy had spoken, the guy would have said, huh? Because he'd have gotten distracted by something. Yeah, that's right. You get many miles out of those sandals? Yeah. All right, so we would expect them to do what they're told, right? You know, if they're faithful. But how do the women respond?
They didn't go, they were afraid, they didn't
Okay.
say anything to anybody.
Well, first, they flee from the tomb, and he tells us why. Why do they flee from the tomb?
Because they were scared.
They were scared. Now, the guy said, don't be scared, and so the women, of course,
Are scared.
are scared. And what do?
They're freaking out.
They're freaking out. And because they're freaking out, what do they end up doing? Which Mark, again, adds to this.
Nothing.
They do exactly the opposite what they were told to do. In fact, Mark goes out of his way. He doesn't say, you know, they freaked out and ran away from the tomb. They told what?
No one.
Nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Because they were afraid. And I think I've mentioned this before. One of the fascinating things in Greek in this is the Greek word that's often translated for as a continuing, or because, as sort of a continuing thought, is the Greek word gar. 3 letters. It's a guard. Gar.
G-A-R.
G-A-R. Gar. And what that when you're sort of building on an idea or answering an implied question from a statement, you might use a gar. So if you got a statement here and somebody would say, well, how is that going to happen? For, and then explanation. And then the next gar explains that and explains that. So it's a word used to explain what comes before. And that's how it was used in Greek. But with this gar, just like with every language, you never put gar at the beginning of a sentence. It was against grammatical rules to put gar. It had to be at least the second word, even though it would go at the beginning.
Who was it stopped by? Everyone.
What's that?
Just the Greeks?
This is Greek grammar. You know, like something peculiar in Greek grammar. You never use this word at the beginning of a sentence in Greek. And this word, what makes it interesting, is this is the last word in the Gospel of Mark, is agar, which is kind of like a preposition at the end. For, they were afraid, but it's at the very end. So the last word in Mark is this word that's last only because Greek grammar, you can't put it at the beginning of the sentence. So, and then the mark is done. Now, that's the resurrection, that's the Easter story in Mark. Okay? So, again, think about similarities between that, bare bones story and things that are that strike you as kind of unique in this story. We won't talk about it now, we'll talk about it later. Okay, next we'll look at Matthew. And this is the story, Matthew 28, 1 through 10. This is the story in Matthew. And think about how this compares to Mark, taking the same resurrection story. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised. As he said, come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples. He has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Okay? Talking about the same story, right? Resurrection story. So let's break this down a little bit. When does this occur?
Same day.
Okay, it's after the Sabbath, first day as it was dawning. And who comes to the tomb?
Mary.
Okay, Mary Magdalene and
The other
the other Mary.
Which is ambiguous because
Okay.
it doesn't identify.
That's right, could be any of a number of
Why
Marys.
couldn't it be Mary?
Could be his
the
mother.
Virgin?
It could be any of a number. It is just another Mary. And of course, we've lost Salome, who was in Mark's story. But so we've got the two women coming to the tomb. And why do they come?
They was gonna clean them up more or less.
Well, again, look at the text.
No, they didn't say anything about it.
Okay, they don't say anything, right?
Went to look at the tomb.
They went to see the tomb, which means they don't mention, if they're going to see the tomb, then what are they doing?
Well, they assume he's there.
Yes, Miranda, you are exactly right. They're mourning, right? So they're sort of, this is like a visual,
Like
you
a
know?
relief, like, oh.
But they're not bringing spices, right?
So they're,
Why do you think they're not bringing spices?
Because
They're not.
they weren't going, they
After
didn't
3
expect
days,
it
I
to,
wouldn't
they
eat.
did not, the stone was still there. They weren't expecting to move the stone.
Absolutely not.
Like Miranda said, they were just mourning.
Right.
So they weren't really going to see him. They weren't going to see his body. So there was no need to bring spices to anoint him.
You're right. Even more basic, if you look at Matthew 26:12, and this is what 26:12, you don't have to look it up. It says, by pouring, this is a woman at the in Bethany, what happens to Jesus at Bethany, where she breaks the bottle of nard and puts it on his head and feet. This is how Matthew describes it. By pouring this ointment on my body, she has prepared me for burial.
So they would have done that before they buried him anyway,
Well,
wouldn't they?
they probably would have, but in Matthew, what had happened? Why would the women not be bringing spices to anoint him?
They don't
Because
think
they
they
already did
can
it.
move
They
that
weren't
rock. So how are they going?
John, you're right, Miranda. But John, what did you say?
Already happened.
It's already happened. There's no reason to anoint him because he was already
Well, that's what I said.
anointed.
Wouldn't they have done that?
Well, but I mean,
before-
when
but
was he anointed?
When
Before.
When he was
chapter
having
28.
dinner and the woman put the perfume
Yes.
on his head and his feet, he said, "This is my anointing," and therefore in Matthew,
Don't
there's
do
no reason
To do it again.
to do it again. That's exactly right. So Matthew doesn't mention it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So they come to the tomb, and so there's no concern about
moving a rock.
moving the rock. Now, when they get to the tomb, because they're just going to be there, maybe pray, meditate, what happens?
An earthquake.
And an earthquake. Jeez Louise, an earthquake. And then what happens?
And a rock moves.
An angel comes down
Moves the rock.
from heaven, rolls the rock away, and does what?
Sits on a rock.
It says, go see.
And sits on the rock.
Don't be
now,
afraid.
comes down, earthquake. Now, have we seen something like this before in Matthew? I bet we have. Or I wouldn't ask the question.
I think we have when he died.
Yes, in Matthew, not in the other ones, but in Matthew, before he died, when he died, there was an earthquake, and stones split, and the dead were walking around Jerusalem, and in fact, all of that happens before someone makes a confession.
For Christ makes it kind of.
Remember the centurion at the cross.
Oh,
Yeah.
surely he is the Son
Yes,
of
it
God.
says surely he's the Son of God. In Matthew, all of this stuff happens, and Matthew says, when the centurion saw these things, he said, truly he is the Son of God. Mark, the centurion saw how he died and said, truly he's the Son of God. But in Matthew, what's going on? All kinds of,
chaos.
cosmic stuff. The dead are being raised in Matthew. And we get the same thing here, right? Matthew, we've got an earthquake. And the stone is being rolled away. And the angel comes down. But the angel is described. How is the angel described?
Same way as
very simple.
very similar. Well, how was he described as
And
angel?
white. He had was
Like-
white.
But the Mark says the guy was dressed in white.
White.
How does Matthew describe?
A white
Oh,
robe.
well, white as snow.
It was white as snow, and he came down like
Light.
lightning.
Why are you
Okay.
saying the angel has to be male?
I'm
You
not.
said he.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's what.
Yeah,
I'm just
That's what
asking.
they
I don't.
said- Mark
yeah,
said
I-
he.
But I mean, that's a pronoun. I don't.
Sorry.
I don't know.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. You know, I don't know. It could be she. Matthew uses a male pronoun, so
Yeah, Mark-
that's why I
Mark
use
said
it.
he was a male.
But I mean, Mark is a young man, but he's using a male pronoun, whether he means it like in English, when you say he, it can include she too. You know,
Well, it says
mankind
he-
includes men and women.
It
So,
says he in the verse.
right, well, right,
So-
right.
Well, if they said
Okay,
a woman-
but I don't know that the gender of the angel is pertinent to the story. Maybe it is, but I don't.
Well,
I
I'm
don't.
saying
tell you,
heads,
they said-
appearance.
Yeah, well, anyway, so the angel comes down, right? And we also have somebody mentioned that we didn't see before.
Guards.
We got guards mentioned, right? And what happens to the guards?
They freeze like they're dead.
They shake and they become like dead men. Okay, so how is Matthew describing this scene? A lot more theatrical. You know, this
A
is
huge event.
this is a huge event, right?
Yeah.
It's more like a opera.
More like a passion play, like
Yes.
we'd see in a theater.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what does the angel say? And this isn't a young man. This is an angel. Okay. What does the angel say?
Don't be afraid.
Okay. Don't be afraid.
I know that
You know why?
You know that I know that you're looking for Jesus. Again, how is Jesus identified?
Was
He's the one crucified.
He's not here.
Okay. He is okay.
And
He's
he's
not
been-
here.
he
Saying
has
he's
been-
been raised.
Place where he lay.
Okay. And what's that?
similar.
Very, very similar. You know, we got something very similar. He's been raised. Okay. But he asked them to look at where he was laid, right?
Yeah.
Which Matthew seems to be stressing maybe a little bit that, you know, he really is not here. Yeah, okay. So, and oh, by the way, why do you think it would be, Mark had 3 women, Matthew has 2. Why? Why would they make sure that it wasn't just one?
Maybe that's the only ones they were acknowledged.
Witnesses, that's it. Witnesses, you know, if 2 people say it, it's true. If one person says it, you're not sure. I mean, that's Jewish. That's Jewish law. You know, that you believe 2 people, but you question one. Okay, so we got 2 people. What command does he give?
Don't be afraid.
Okay, he gives the same thing. Then what does he tell him
Go
to do?
tell the disciples.
Okay, go quickly and tell his disciples, which is,
He doesn't.
He
Is-
doesn't-
is-
he
is-
says disciples, he doesn't.
doesn't specify,
No, he doesn't.
you know, doesn't break Peter out, just all the disciples. And what are they supposed to tell, what are the women supposed to tell the
He has
disciples?
been raised.
Okay, he's been raised again. We got this passive tense,
And he's
you
headed
know.
to Galilee.
Okay, he's headed to Galilee, same thing, right? And
Then you will see.
they're gonna see him, right? Okay, why Galilee?
Because
That's
where
where
Christ
that's
said
his
he's gonna
place
go.
of origin.
Okay, that's where he started, you know.
That's where Christ
That's
told
where
him
he-
to
That's,
go where they're
okay,
going.
that's where it started. And he says, one of the things that's really interesting is early in Matthew, Jesus talks about Galilee. And he said, this is something he only says in Matthew. Calls it the Galilee of the nations. Galilee of the nations. Now, what do you think he means when he says Galilee of the nations? Who are the nations? Okay.
Jewish nations.
Ju-
The 12 tribes, or all the tribes are,
Oh,
Well, one of the interesting things is, this is ethnos, that's the word for nations. One of the interesting things is, for a good Jew, you had Jews, and then you had the ethnos, or the ethnoi. You know, you had Jews and ethnoi, and everybody else was ethnoi. Greeks were ethnoi, Romans were ethnoi, Persians were ethnoi. They were all nations.
They were all nations.
They were all, yeah, often translated, ethnos is often translated Gentiles. They were non-Jews. So why would they call Galilee of the nations? Because a Jew would never say, that's one of the ironies in the trial, a Jew would never call himself a nation.
Well,
They are the Jews.
Outsiders, yeah.
You know,
Eventually,
It's this
his teachings are going to encompass everything.
Okay. Galilee as a historical place was an area where you had a lot of different ethnic groups working together. I mean, it wasn't, Judea was sort of the Jewish homeland, but Galilee was a little to the north, so they had more contact with Greeks and Persians and all. So in Galilee, there were a lot more different people. And the people in Judea really didn't care for people from Galilee because, Judeans were Jews.
Yeah.
People in Galilee, they were exposed to a lot of different ideas. And I think you're right. By going to Galilee kind of points the future. The future is not going to be in
Just
Jerusalem. Isn't going to be in Judea, but going to be
The world.
to the world, to the
Yeah,
nations.
Can it
Just
be more
one
like the
people.
center of the earth, and then once he's done, then they could just scatter?
Yeah, well, that's, and it goes to other nations. Okay, so he says you're gonna be there. Now, remember in Mark, same sort of thing going on, right? It's very similar. Some of the words are a little different, but very similar. The women did what in Mark?
Ran away.
They ran away and told no one. How did these women respond?
Well, they ran into Jesus.
They run. They're afraid, right?
Well,
But they're also
they're kind of
Maybe
all mixed up.
well,
They're afraid and joyful.
they're filled with, yes, they have joy coming out of the pores.
But
They
they
just
still
are
are
gushing joy.
Like gossiping with joy.
Oh, gossiping with joy. As
Just
some
like-
of y'all may have done in the past.
Just like the Canaan country.
So
They're also fearful.
yes, they left, and what did they immediately do?
Run into Jesus.
They're going to tell the disciples, right? Which means what are these women doing?
They're going to
They're
obey.
listening.
They are doing what they were told.
Exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's exactly the opposite of what they are doing what they're told. They're carrying the message, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which really makes them
Special.
what if they're carrying the message? They're faithful,
Special. True.
like proclaimers, right? Because they are carrying God's message to someone just like they were called to do, right? And as they're going to tell the disciples, right? Who do they run into? Literally.
Jesus.
Boom, they run into Jesus, right? And
And
yeah.
he sort of has to reinforce the command of it.
Well, he says, how does he greet them?
I can't believe you just said greetings.
Okay, now it's interesting. These women are doing what they're told, right?
Yeah.
So they're on a mission. And their mission is what?
To tell the
It's to tell the disciples. As they're going on the mission, Jesus is there, right? They run into Jesus as they go into the mission. And what does Jesus tell them?
Don't be afraid.
Well, first, what do?
They're probably shocked.
What's that?
They worship.
They worship him. And what do they do as they worship him?
Worship his
It says they take hold of his
feet.
Now, that seems, take it. Well, one, if you're taking hold of his feet, what are they doing?
Trying to stop
They're
him.
They're bowing. They're going all the way to the ground, right? Because, they're going down. But the fact that they're taking hold of his feet show what about him?
That he's divine. That he's
He is there. Yeah, he's worthy of worship, but he is there. You can touch him. It's not like he was a ghost and the hands just went through him. He is physically present there. So they can take hold of his feet and worship him. And then what does he say to them?
He says, don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers, and
Don't be afraid.
they will see me there.
Okay,
Galilee.
go to Galilee, they'll see him. Now, how does that compare to the message the angel told him?
Oh, it's the same.
It is the same
But
message.
one thing I read there, he tells them that, tell my brothers, not
Right.
my disciples,
Okay.
not my followers.
All right.
We are now brothers.
Okay, and
Rather than fathers. He's part of our, or we're part of his family now.
Absolutely, and whatever would have happened in the past is
Forgiven.
done.
Yeah.
You know, is now done, and we are now brothers. Kind of interesting that as these women are going about the mission, Jesus is reinforcing the mission they're on, and Jesus is present there as they go. Now that might be kind of significant, that as they leave the tomb going about their mission, Jesus is there with them, right? They encounter Jesus on their mission.
He may not
As they
be
do
at
the
the
mission.
tomb, but he's on the way and they catch up with him.
That's exactly right. Jesus is as they do their mission. Now again, this is him Matthew is shaping this story, right? To make a point. Now think about it. Where are some similarities? Where are some differences? And what might be Matthew's point in this resurrection story? Just file it away. We'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, in Luke 24, 1 through 12. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women went to the tomb, and they brought scented herbs and oils which they prepared. But they found the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. And when they went inside, they didn't find the body of Lord Jesus. And it happened, when they were at a loss concerning this also, behold, 2 men came and stood by them in clothing that was dazzling. And they became frightened and bowed their faces to the ground. And the men said to him, "Why are you seeking the living among the dead? He is not here, but has been raised. Remember how he spoke to you when he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be given over to the hands of sinful people and crucified and on the third day rise." And they remembered his words. And after they'd returned from the tomb, they announced all these things to the 11 and all the rest. And there was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the rest of the women who were with them. They said to the apostles these things, and these words appeared to them like nonsense, and they didn't believe the women. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, and after he'd stooped to look in, he saw the wrappings by themselves, and he went away to his home amazed by what had happened. Okay? That's according to Luke. Again, when does this happen?
Sunday is the day after.
Okay, again, first day of the week, early dawn. Now, who's present?
2 men.
2.
Well, no, not who's?
Oh, you got 3 women.
Okay, you got 3. Well, right now, as we go through the story, all we know is it's a feminine they. Right at the beginning, because remember, he doesn't give the names at the beginning. It is just the feminine they. And where do they go?
They went inside.
They went to the tomb, and what were they bringing?
Spices.
They were bringing herbs and spices. So why were they coming to the tomb? To anoint the body. You know, they were coming to anoint the body. Okay? Why would they do this? He hadn't been anointed before, right? Okay. So what do they find?
Empty tomb.
Okay, they find that the stone had been rolled away, and they go inside, and what is lacking in that tomb? Okay, there is no body.
There's no
of
guy there.
Okay, there's-
no
They label him as
mystical
Lord
person
Jesus.
there.
There is no person. But
Didn't find
You-
the
2
body.
men.
But-
there.
how does Luke, as he tells the story, remember we had that identification of Jesus, right? In the other ones, the one crucified. How does Luke identify Jesus here as he's telling the story? He says, Lord Jesus, right? Which means, what is he conveying?
That he's
Divine.
the Lord.
Oh, that we got, he's curios. He's using the name for God in the Old Testament. So Luke is kind of subtle by just adding that little word, kind of changes it from Jesus of Nazareth to the Lord Jesus. Okay? So they're looking for, he's not there, right? Okay. He set the scene, right? Now, how do they feel? How do the women feel? They don't know. They're at a loss, right? They're kind of confused. What happens to them in the tomb?
2 men appear.
2 men came and stood by them. Now, coming doesn't necessarily suggest they magically appeared. You know, they were in the tomb, two men just
Came in?
just came. Now, why two? I mean, we saw an angel and we saw a young man. Why do we get two men here?
Witness again?
Yes. We got witnesses again. Because evidently Luke sees that as important. What they're going to say cannot be said by one person, needs to be said by two. You know, because you got a witness. And how are they dressed? Dazzling. Which meant they kind of look like Elton John. So if you want to think about how they appeared, it was sort of Elton John-like. Yeah, big sunglasses, platform shoes, you know.
Could be the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper.
Yes, it could have been the Beatles, could have been Liberace, any of a number of people. But they were magnificent. Magnificent. Now, evidently, they were dazzling, must show that they are,
Something special.
yeah, because how do the women react?
They were frightened.
I mean, they are frightened, and what do?
Bow their heads.
Bow their heads to the ground. Now, if they're bowing their heads to the ground, what are they doing? They're worshiping. That's exactly, they're worshiping. That's what they're doing. So Luke has given us sort of the identity of the men because the women are worshiping, right? And what do the men say first?
Why are you seeking the living among the dead?
Why are you seeking the living among the dead?
Why are you here?
Yeah, why are you here? And then what does he say? What do they say?
He's not here.
He's not here, but he has been raised.
Now understand, they are saying it, you know, as we read Luke. So it's not like one of them is saying it and the other one's just standing there. They are like a two-person chorus. Like this is a duet that they're singing. Yeah, stereo. They're saying it together.
Unison.
Yeah, they're saying it in unison. Okay. And again, we got this passive verb. Somebody else caused him to rise. What are they told then to? Wait a minute, I've lost my place a little bit.
Remember how he spoke to
Okay.
you.
Yeah, what does he say? He says, seeking the living. Now, what do they say? What's the next thing they say? Because in the other ones, what did the angel and the young man say?
We'll go and tell.
Okay, go and tell the disciples and to go to Galilee, right?
Right.
Okay, what do these two guys say?
Remember how he spoke to you when
Okay.
he was still in Galilee.
He says, remember how he spoke to you. Okay, so what are they doing?
That they should know.
These two,
that
what are these two guys doing?
They're telling them
Reaffirming.
that they already know.
Yes, they reaffirm. They're telling him what they already know, right? And why do they know it?
Because he already told
Because he already told
He
them.
already told
You know, so what he's doing is these two guys are telling them what Jesus has already
Told them.
told them.
He's reminding.
He's reminding them. He's telling them to remember, right?
Remember.
Now, that's kind of interesting because what is that then, as the reader, what is that saying to us?
that they don't even know.
Well, what is that saying to us? Because he's saying remember, which means they do know. Because, if they didn't know, they
The writer
remember.
might not
That,
know exactly what was being
that
said.
they're telling, as we read that, what do we start doing? We start remembering too, right? Which may tell us something that may be important in Luke. Because we didn't see any of this remembering stuff in the other ones, right? Okay. And in fact, they say, remember, and by gum, what do the women do?
Remember.
Luke says they remember, right? And what happens after they remember?
They go and announce it
Okay,
to the 11 and the rest.
they go and announce it to the 11 and the rest. Now, who are the 11?
The disciples.
Disciples, apostles.
Oh, thank you, Miranda, because they're apostles. One of the things we see in Luke, different when I said who are the 11 and you said disciples, in Mark you'd be right, in Matthew you'd be right, in Luke the 11 are the apostles. And how many apostles do you have? 12. Well, you should have 12. One of them is gone. And Luke does talk about Judas killing himself. Oh, we'll find that out in Acts. But Judas is going, and they have to pick a replacement. They pick a replacement apostle in Acts because you got to have how many? 12. 13?
Nope.
Nope. 11?
Nope.
Nope. 12. And the rest are
The followers.
disciples.
The
You got a
crowd.
difference between
The crowd.
the apostles have a certain role in the early church in Luke. So they're kind of separated. Okay, so they return, they announce it to the 11, and now we finally get
Women.
who they are, right?
Yeah.
And who is there?
Mary Magdalene.
We know it's Mary Magdalene. And we got Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and so you got 3, right?
Yeah.
Really?
No.
No. And then it says the rest of the women. So how many women were at the tomb?
More than that.
More than 3. More than 3. Because the rest of the women were
Could
there.
have been a gaggle.
Could have been a gaggle.
Gaggle.
Could have been a herd.
Just like when they go to the
But they
bathroom.
didn't,
Yes, that's right. Just like going to the bathroom.
but they didn't,
Yeah. You know?
Yeah, we can't go
Just
back
one stall.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't want to be with a group of men that say, let's all go to the bathroom together. No.
neither do I.
You know, that's something that makes men very nervous. Okay, so you may
She
have
said boys in school.
you may have had a lot of women. Now, so the women have said this.
Well, there's a lot of women because they know that they'll talk and they'll spread it.
They have
Well,
witnesses.
They'll-
Yeah, unless they're in Mark,
Yeah.
and then they don't tell anybody.
But they'll get on the phone and, did you hear? Did you hear?
Well, what do they do? What do they do? What do these women do?
They went and told
They tell them, right? Because they tell the apostles these things. And how did the apostles, how are the words received?
Like nonsense.
Okay, it seems to them like nonsense, and they didn't believe
No.
the women. Now, why would the women be believable?
Because they didn't.
As we the reader are reading this, and we see the apostles don't believe them. Why do we the reader say, man, these guys are dumb? You know, because we know what about the women?
They really saw
Man,
it.
they are really reliable,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's true.
You know, they are really
They
reliable.
saw the clue.
They saw, and you know what else they did? When the guy said, remember, they remembered. You know, and they went to tell
The rest.
the rest of them. Now, they didn't believe, but there's an exception.
Peter.
Who's the exception?
Peter.
No.
Peter is the exception, because what does Peter do?
He goes to
Okay,
He
he
goes
gets
to
up.
verify.
Go be sure.
Trust but verify.
Peter gets up, runs to the tomb. He trusts, but he verifies. And when he stoops and looks into the tomb, he sees
Nothing.
something that we don't even hear mentioned before. He sees the wrappings and
No.
and now nobody, and he is amazed by what happened. Now, it's interesting because Peter is kind of pulled out. Now, what would you expect Peter's role to be in the book of Acts? In other words, in Luke's story later, what do you expect his role to be?
One of the
He's going to be the leader. He's going to be the leader. So he's kind of pulled apart, and he's going to be the
What
leader.
amazes me about all these stories, Jesus already told them this was going to happen.
Absolutely.
So why are they all like, duh, gee, it really did happen?
Well,
Big shock.
and
Why? Wouldn't
that's
it be if you were told? If you
that's-
told me you were going to raise from the dead and you rose from the dead, I don't think that would be.
well, and remember, we're taking the stories as they are. So if they question and don't believe, that must mean the writer is conveying that he's trying to shape how we see this by what he's writing. You know, he's not looking to logically explain it, because this isn't a historical account. This is clearly, because we've got 3 different accounts, you know, that are not the same. Each one is telling the story in a way to convey something to the reader, to cause us to leave the story knowing something or believing something we didn't believe to start with. Sort of like we did with the three little pigs as you start shaping that story. Okay, we got one more to go. Okay, so again, think about how this is a little different and what we're going to do, what we can do with it. Okay.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Do you think we have all these people going in and out of this around this tomb, but no one's ever mentioning there was a multitude there already there, or there's something coming after us? They don't do that.
Right. Which means what?
Didn't happen.
Well, no, what does that mean? Because remember, we're looking at these four accounts as story.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the best way to look at the Gospels. Take them as self-contained stories.
Yes.
You know, if that isn't mentioned, what does that say? The writer didn't want us to think about it. The writer, it's not important to what he wants to convey to you. And the writer doesn't want us to bring this stuff in, because if he did, he would have done what?
Said something.
He would have said something. He would have said something.
He didn't bring it in, but maybe it wasn't there to bring it.
Well, that's true. That's true.
But he didn't want everybody to pay more attention to him.
Yeah,
than what the actual.
Right. I think that's true. But we want to sort of approach it to see what the writer wants us to take. Because clearly we've got three different accounts to this point. But of course we'll know now that John is going to be just like the others, right?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
They're all different so far.
So far, they've all been different. So let's look at John. On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early in the morning while it was still dark to the tomb, and she saw the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Now she ran and went to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've laid him." Now Peter and the other disciple went out and went to the tomb. The two of them ran together, and the other disciple ran ahead, overtaking Peter, and he came first to the tomb. And when he stooped and peered in, and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Now Simon Peter also came following him, and went into the tomb and saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the sudarium, which is a cloth they put on his face, on his face, which was on his head, was not lying with the linen wrappings, but had been rolled up in a place by itself. Now then the other disciple, the one who was first to the tomb, went in and saw, and he believed. For they did not yet know the scripture that he must rise from death. Now the disciples went back to themselves. And Mary standing outside the tomb weeping. And Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping. Now as she was, hold just a second. Now as she was weeping, she stood and peered into the tomb and saw two angels in white standing, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus was laid. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "They have taken my Lord, and I don't know where they laid him." After she said these things, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you seeking?" Because she thought he was a gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, then tell me where you laid him, and I myself will take him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." And after she turned around, she said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. And go to my brothers and sisters and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord, and this he said to me."
Now this is really different.
This is really different, right? Good. Which tells us it's by
More
just
detail.
that observation. What does it tell you immediately about the Gospel of John?
They
Well-
put a different meaning into what was.
The Gospel of John is going to be really different. When you look at the John compared to the other three, John is really different.
Well, it was written so much later.
No, it was probably written about the same time as Luke and Matthew,
Well, okay.
but to a different audience.
Yeah.
To a different audience. Okay, when does this occur? Again,
Same time.
okay, same time. Who's there?
Mary.
Just Mary
Okay,
Magdalene.
just Mary.
Just Mary.
Which is not unusual because that's what John does, often focuses on individuals rather than groups. What time of day?
It was still dark.
Okay, early in the morning, it was still dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, all the other three, it was always early in the morning, but it was dawn, right?
That's part of the concept.
Now it's dark. Now, again, if we're trying to figure out what the writer's trying to tell us, by saying that Mary, in a sense, Mary was in the dark, wasn't she? When she came to the tomb. What might that mean?
She didn't know.
She didn't know. She was literally in the dark. She was figuratively in the dark. And that's especially powerful when you look at John, because John loves this light and dark. The light came into the world, that's all John. You know, the world was in darkness, you know, that's all in John. John loves this light and dark business. Nicodemus comes in the dark, you know, at night. You know, he likes this play of light and dark. And Mary, right here, is in the dark, which means she...
She might have been sneaking without no light or
Well,
something.
it certainly says that she probably doesn't believe, right? Because she's in the dark, right? What happens at the tomb?
She said the stone
Stone is rolled away.
No stone, right? No stone. And what does she do and say?
Well, she thinks Jesus would take her.
Okay, well, she immediately goes and runs
More or less to the disciples.
to the disciples. And what do they do and see? So she runs to the disciples. And how many disciples does she go to? Two! It says it goes to Peter and the other disciple.
And the other disciples.
And who is the other disciple? The one whom Jesus loved. Now, who the heck is the one whom Jesus loved? Don't know. Well, could be John, but never is identified. Is identified as the writer of this work, but never given a name. Just that he is the one whom Jesus loved. Okay, so she tells two. Now, this is really
Wait a
kind of
minute, I
interesting.
don't agree with that. Now
Okay.
Now she ran and went to Simon Peter and to the other disciple.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So they run to him, and what happens
Well, they
to these
think
two
it-
disciples?
They think, well, they
They're freaking
outrace
out.
each
Wow.
other.
Okay, they start running, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting as the writer is writing this, who's running ahead? The other disciple gets there first, so he is
The first
The
witness.
first one.
leading, right? He's the first, he's the first one, right? And what does he do?
He peeks in.
He peeks in and sees the stuff in the tomb, right?
Right.
Okay, Peter, what happens to Peter?
Peter catches up and
Peter catches up, and what does Peter do?
he didn't go in.
Peter goes in, right? And sees the stuff. Okay, and then what happens?
Wait a minute, the first guy didn't go in.
No, he doesn't. He just looks in.
Yeah.
And then Peter goes in, right?
He came in. He
Simon
went-
goes in,
Simon Peter, yeah.
and then eventually the other guy, the one whom Jesus loves, goes in, and he sees the same thing, right, in the tomb. And what does John say happened to this other guy? The one who got there first.
Well, he believed.
Oh, went
He
and saw
believed.
And believed, yeah.
Right. So in a sense, he's not in a sense. He is the first one for John who has believed after the resurrection.
Okay, this is what the next sentence is what I
Okay?
says, for they did not know the scripture that he must rise from the dead. I thought he had already told them that.
Yeah, he told the ladies.
Well, he told them that
But
in
they-
Romans.
But what book are you looking, what book are you talking
Writing
about?
it.
Well,
This is the Gospel of John. This is the Gospel of John. He hasn't said it in John. You know, he said it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but he never said it in John. You know, and so in John's story, this is
the first time.
the first time. This is the first time. He has talked about returning. You know, John sees the crucifixion, we're not talking about that, but very different than the other three. You know, so,
Okay, can I ask another
yeah,
question?
sure.
Can we imply from the rest of the Bible that the other disciple was Paul?
The one whom he loved? Probably not.
Who would it be?
Well, it could have been John, could have been Lazarus. The only one in John that is identified as a person whom Jesus loved is Lazarus. That's the only one in John. And it
Lazarus a
says,
disciple?
well, John is so different than the others. Could it be Lazarus? Well, it could be. Could it be John? Could be. Do we know for sure? The only way we know for sure is how. How would we know for sure?
If John told us.
If he said, I, John, wrote this. And he never does. He never does. And remember, the names for the books are given way after the books are written. They're attributed way after the books are written. So unless it says it in the work itself, we can't be sure. Now, Luke says it in the work itself, that I, Luke, wrote this. So you say, oh, Luke. Well, but he wrote to a guy named Theophilus, which means friend of God. Boy, that's a fishy name.
Yeah.
That sounds like a name that represented more than one person. So, even if they use the names, are they, what are they, how are they using it?
That's the reason why I said implied, because
I
Paul is so prevalent in the rest of the Bible.
Right.
That you'll almost think,
Well, that would assume that Paul was present in Judea, and Paul historically, well, he was from Antioch, which is up towards Asia Minor. So it could have been, but probably not. That would be doubtful that it was. And the theology in John is so different than Paul's theology. Okay, so we've got that right. Now
I don't mean he contributed to John's theology. I just mean that he was there, and since he was the first one to believe.
Well, symbolically, it certainly could be. Now we got something really odd going on, because who returns? Now we had Mary, right? Go to the tomb, look in, bang, run, tell Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved. Right, gone, away from the tomb. Now where's Mary? Back at the tomb.
Standing outside.
Now she's at the tomb again.
Well, she ran with
Which seems kind of odd, because that means she must have gone back. What we may have is we may have two stories.
Well, she ran with Peter here at the beginning. Now she ran and went to Simon.
Right.
Then she
I'm
said that
thinking
she
they
went
were
with
just
him.
camped around there.
Yeah.
I do too.
Well,
Well,
They weren't
again,
there for a
this
while.
is kind of an interesting thing. All of a sudden, she's back at the tomb, right?
She's back.
And now she's back at almost like it's another story, like the other ones, because she's at the tomb, and what happens at the tomb?
She's
was
weeping.
Well, she's weeping. She peers in the tomb. What does she see?
2 angels.
Now we got how many? 2 angels. We've had one young man, we had one angel, we had 2 men, and now we got 2 angels. Okay, so we have covered the gambit, right?
Yeah.
And what does she say?
She said,
Or what do they say to her?
Why are you
Why are
weeping?
you
Okay, why are you weeping? And what does she say?
They've taken
She said,
my
"If
Lord."
they-
Okay,
She thinks he's
and
been
I don't know
stolen.
where they lay. Now, one of the things we see in the Gospel of John, which is kind of cool, is John loves to use irony. And in other words, he has people say things that they mean, when they say it, they mean one thing, but when we read it, we hear something else, and we say, boy, that sure means more than the words. And what she's saying, if you take what she says literally, where's the body? I don't know where the body is. But if we, the reader, know what happened to Jesus, what do we know happened to Jesus? He was raised, right? Because we're Christians, right? That's why we're reading it. So we know what happened to the body. We know the body was taken by God, right? And so we know where he is, so we know this, but she doesn't. Okay, she says that, which makes it kind of ironic, and because it's so ironic, who immediately appears?
Jesus.
Boom, Jesus appears. But
She doesn't.
she doesn't recognize him, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now that seems odd too. She doesn't recognize him. Okay, and so what does Jesus say to her?
Why are you weeping?
Why are you weeping? Which is the same thing
But the men-
the angel said, right? And she thinks he's a gardener.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and she says to him,
If you carry him
Those
away,
bushes
then tell
need
me where you
trimmed.
laid him.
Okay, if you know who's taking him, show me, right? And then Jesus says,
Mary.
he says, Mary. And what happens?
Then she knows who he is.
Now she knows who he is. Now that seems kind of odd, right?
Maybe it's a sort of
Kind
town he
of
always
seems kind of
Now,
weird.
it seems kind of weird, and I'll tell you, when you're reading something like this, in fact, when you're reading any, I almost said fiction, but story, doesn't matter whether, whenever you read a story and you say, boy, that's weird, then there's a good chance that
It's weird.
It's supposed to be.
it's supposed to be, and something more is
Yes.
going on
Maybe
than
he
on the
just-
surface.
Maybe it was
he-
just more of a tone that he carried when he
Well,
said it.
again,
Maybe
that
he
would be
didn't-
that would be literal, but what if it's figurative?
What if he didn't look like Jesus?
Well, but what
If she didn't recognize him?
does Jesus ever earlier on in the Gospel of John talk about Jesus calling names?
Not really.
Oh, yeah. When he talks about the Good Shepherd. And he says the Good Shepherd will call his flock, his sheep, and they will what? They will know his voice. And in fact call them by name. He says, and he will call them by name and they will know his voice. And that's what's happening here. That's what's happening. So this, we don't want to get distracted with, what did he look like? Because that's not John's point. The point is, Jesus
He was
calls his disciples by name. And that's what he does for her. And that's when she recognizes him. But the title she uses for him is not a title of faith.
No.
People that have faith don't call him rabbi.
No.
They call him what?
Teacher.
Teacher.
Now, they don't call him teacher, they call him
Lord.
Lord. That's what they call him. The people who believe in him call him Lord because he is Lord. They don't just call him rabbi or teacher. So she doesn't, but she recognizes him. And then what does he say?
Don't claim to me.
Because I have not ascended. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. So I'm not going to get into it because I don't know what John has got in his mind when he says that, because that would kind of speak against that physical resurrection, and I'm not sure what's going on
Like
here.
she got there too soon.
Yeah,
Everybody
exactly.
Gets there in the daylight.
Like he
Yeah,
didn't get the
and
meatball himself.
he's going to appear again, and they're going to touch his nail prints in his hand. So he's going to be physical in the next story. I don't know what he's getting at here. I really don't, and I've read enough that most people don't know what he's getting at here. There's something he's got something in mind. I just don't know what it is. And we saw in Matthew that Matthew, when he describes it, goes out of his way to say they grabbed his feet. But here she wants to add, he says, no, I haven't ascended to my Father. I don't know what's going on. But he does say, he does identify himself with respect to God, right? Which he hasn't done quite so strongly. What does he say about himself in the way he identifies the Father?
My Father,
My Father, your Father, my
your
God, your God. Okay, so he's now she has been brought into this. And Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples. I don't know whether Peter and the other one are there as part of this. Like I said, this sounds like a story that's kind of been combined. Like we got two stories going on here.
Or it's just a
that have been
storytelling and he's just kind of combined.
Yeah, that he's combined the two because it seems independent of the first part where the two come together.
Because somebody might have told him the story, he might have thought that ascending.
Well, one of the things that could be that it's for John, it's really important that the beloved disciple is the first one. And Peter's the first one. It isn't Mary Magdalene. It's part of Jesus' inner group. That's the first one to the tomb. Maybe. It's an awkward connection between these two stories. Okay, so we've got that. Now, as we've gone through this, and we can do this really fast, as we've gone through it, what are some similarities we saw across the board?
The majority of it they have.
Okay, all of them on the same day. What else, Miranda?
The same women most.
Okay, we got women. Mary is consistent because Mary Magdalene's on all of them, and then the other ones kind of vary. But they all women.
Yeah,
Some
and
kind
angels
of
appeared.
showing to verify that he's risen, either an angel or the men. Or
Okay, you got angels,
something.
Natural.
some supernatural being, although Mark is a young man in a white robe.
Yeah.
That's a little,
Two
but
men,
it's still, we get the sense that he is special.
Someone here.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that. What else is
Well,
The
consistent?
angels are always
Because the
there.
stone was rolled away in every story.
In all the stories, the stone is rolled away. Matthew's a little more dramatic because we see the stone
see the
rolling.
stone rolling.
Kind of interesting though, in Matthew, you see the stone rolled away, but you don't see Jesus walking out.
No.
You don't see Jesus walking out. Okay, so we don't have that at any of
He
them,
didn't
that
have to use
Jesus
that front
is
door.
leaving.
He didn't have to
I don't
use the
know.
front door,
Yeah, I
did
don't
he?
know. Okay, so anything else that you saw is consistent between all four?
Angels.
Well,
they're always
were all-
described a different way.
Yeah, but they're always
somebody
there.
telling them, don't be afraid.
Okay,
It's the
don't be
situation.
afraid is kind of consistent, you know?
And always go to tell the disciples.
Always having something to do with telling the disciples,
Spread the
good.
word.
And some identification of Jesus having been raised. Now, what are some of the differences?
The guards.
You got guards in Matthew, but now file that away because when we look at Matthew, the story in Matthew, post-resurrection appearance, guards are going to play a role. I didn't preach on it, but we're going to talk about it. So guards are going to play a role in Matthew's gospel that we don't have in the other others.
And the one in the first story that, the women don't do what they're told.
Okay?
Is the exact opposite. In the other stories, they seem to come around.
Which the women seem to do what they're told to do. Which is a good thing because God tells them to do it.
Yeah, and they did it.
You do it. Okay, but not in
I
Mark.
even noticed about the angels. They're not in the same place. Every time they describe them,
They're in different places, particularly in Matthew, because the angel in Matthew isn't even in the tomb. He's sitting on the rock, right?
Well, they had two of them, wasn't it?
Well, that was Luke. Well, the two angels was in John, but you had two men in Luke.
Oh, the women all start their journey in Bethany.
Well, all the women are starting their journeys somewhere.
It doesn't say Bethany.
Doesn't say-
We don't know where they started from.
Right. But they all show up at the same time. Although John chooses to say instead of dawn,
Yeah.
they're in the dark.
That's right.
Mary's in the dark.
And
How could they look at you
Jesus,
two in the dark? I'm sorry.
Well, again,
Torture.
Yeah.
and the idea that she's in the dark.
it was-
Yeah, I get that. She's in the dark.
That makes better
Yeah,
sense.
she's in the
The
dark.
difference is John
And
is
they're
like a complete
different. And
different
his-
Okay,
story.
good. Hold just a second. Miranda, good. John is completely
Different story.
is really, really different. Although that still Ray is still somebody at the tomb, stone still. So those things are still there, but you got a lot of differences going on in John. That's different than the other three.
I was going to say, one of the other things, they all agree that Jesus had died.
Right.
And he was buried.
Right.
I mean, those are
And he just
And was
raised.
and was
That's-
raised.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's
right.
That's the key part.
That's right. What are some other? Yes.
Well, Jesus' destination was Galilee. I'm not sure about John. but-
We don't know about John, do we? And what else do we not know about? We don't know about Luke. Luke never gives a destination.
No, he wasn't there either.
Yeah. Well, Luke doesn't tell us where the disciples are supposed to go. We've got in Matthew and Mark, we've got him going to Galilee, right?
Yeah.
But in Luke, he doesn't tell them where to go, right? We don't have that. So that's a little different. And that's going to be a really important difference. That Luke doesn't have them go to Galilee. Okay? Yeah.
So John's a little bit of an exaggerator.
What John does in his whole gospel, and I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about John. In fact, I had it at a session meeting, which is cool. We talk about Bible. Who'd have thunk? At a session meeting, that John is going to emphasize the God aspect of Jesus more than the other
More than
three.
the other ones.
And if you look at Jesus is Orthodox Christians believe Jesus is 100% God, 100% human. How does that happen? I don't know. but it's some kind of, it's not a mixture. He's not half and half. He is 100%. And if Mark is going to emphasize the humanity, that Jesus is the one who suffered and died and felt abandonment, John is going to emphasize the divinity. That Jesus is the one who knows exactly who he is. In John, Jesus calls himself Son of Man, Son of God, in chapter 2. In Mark, he never says it, ever. But so you've got this difference. Is one right, the other wrong? Well, only if you're saying they're all writing history. If they're writing confessions of faith, if they're writing the good news, then both are right. Because Jesus is God, but Jesus is also human. He is the suffering Son of God. He is the exalted Son of God. Both are true, and both of them are they condition one another. So you don't get too far in one direction or the other. You take those two together, and you have a complete picture of who Jesus is. So right now, I hope you're seeing that maybe the point, and another difference that you might, if you look at Matthew and Mark, he says, the commandment is to go and tell the disciples to go to Galilee. But remember in Luke, what's the first thing he said? Remember what he taught. And that may, you file that away. Maybe that's going to be really important in the rest of Luke and in Acts, that remembering what Jesus taught is going to be a big deal.
Okay, but even though he doesn't tell them, is it that the same message? Then didn't he tell them that I'll meet you in Galilee?
Not in Luke.
Okay.
Not in Luke.
I was going to say about the fundamental story. Jesus died, was buried,
Absolutely.
and the resurrection.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the story.
Right.
And we have women react differently when they flee the tomb. They all seem to flee the tomb, but how they relate to the disciples is a little bit different. But the core of the story is the same.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that. That's right. The reason, though, I think it's important to look at these other things is the resurrection is more than just a historical event. It is a profound theological. It is the hinge on which history turns, and it is so full of meaning. That one story it can't be exhausted in one story. So everything here brings different complexions, nuances to this wonderful story. And that's what I want us to see. By the time we finish this, I hope that this becomes more than just that bare bones, description we started with, that we're going to see, each of these evangelists are doing this resurrection and trying to make a point, and we can leave here with 4 different understandings, which is better than or better than one. Better than one.
I got a question.
When did John write that?
John was the last one.
John, in terms of history, in terms of the
If we know, let me backtrack. When was John written? Who wrote it?
Was he like a later
John,
person,
what John is writing, it's almost the audience that becomes really important in each of these. Yeah, John, somewhere between the year 85 and 95, in that 10-year period, we've got 3 Gospels written. Can be pretty sure of that because some of the things in the Gospels refer to historical events that occurred, have already occurred, like the destruction of Jerusalem. So the writers of these 3 Gospels knew about the destruction of Jerusalem because they refer to it in the work. Odds are Mark was written before because he doesn't refer to Jerusalem being destroyed, so he didn't know it. It hadn't happened yet when he wrote his gospel. Now, what John is writing, John is writing to a group of people, a Christian church, all of them writing to Christian, that probably have the weakest Hebrew background of the 4. Because what you see in John is he will use a Hebrew word and will explain it. Will define it. You know, like his audience, they don't know Hebrew. So when he uses a Hebrew word, he has to define it.
Like teacher.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. He's got a lot of parenthetical stuff, you know, where somebody says something and then he says, this means. You know, John does that a lot with parentheses. So he's probably writing to a community that has been very influenced by Greek. They're Jewish, they just don't have a strong Jewish background. They aren't Gentiles. They're Jewish, but they've been more cosmopolitan. They're more influenced. Now, John's Greek is very, very simple, kind of Dick and Jane Greek. So it's not sophisticated. Luke is very sophisticated. He uses grammar that an accomplished writer would use.
So it's probably
That's
like a second language.
yeah. It's a very basic, very simple. I think John's gospel reflects and like I said, this divine Christ. And in fact, I think the readers of his gospel took it too far. And in fact, that's why you have the letters of John sort of pull them back. Because when you read the letters of John, it would appear as though there are people to whom John is writing that now believe Jesus wasn't human at all. Jesus wasn't a real person at all. He only appeared to be, which is what Gnostics believe, you know, that he wasn't flesh and blood. And now we've got in his letter saying, man, if you got this idea, this is wrong. He was flesh and blood. He was very real. So it's that community that he's writing to. And each of them are writing to different groups. I think Luke is the most sophisticated Jewish audience because he quotes the Old Testament, never refers to it. Matthew's is Jewish, but they don't know the Bible real well. And that's why he has to say, you know, things like, according to the prophets, or as the prophets say. So he has to tell them when he's quoting the Old Testament. Luke never does. He quotes it, but just alludes to it, as though his audience can understand what he's saying.
Was the Bible all written by this time?
No.
No.
Well, then
no.
why did you say it's in the Bible? I mean, when you said that a minute ago, I didn't understand how that worked.
Well,
It's in the Old Testament. The Old Testament was written.
when I said, what was it that I said that?
You said they changed the way they talked, except for Luke. Luke was more thorough and more. But the other ones, are they just writing and they don't know that this was going to happen?
No. All of these are being written after Jesus. Everything in the New Testament was written by Christian. There was one thing in the New Testament written by somebody who didn't believe. And to even take it further, everything in the New Testament was written to a community where people believed. This was not written to be left in a hotel room, you know, in a drawer in a hotel room, you know, to convince a pagan that Christianity was good. These were written to Christian communities of people that already believed. And what they were trying to do is they believed in Jesus, but this is going to refine their belief. This is going to
Because
increase
they saw him, literally.
their understanding. Well, you know, we're talking about people that were probably writing in the year 90 AD. Jesus would have been crucified in around 35. The fact, were they eyewitnesses? Probably not. But what they did was they had inherited, you know, these stories. You know, that's what I want to, you know, I tell people, imagine you're sitting at a table with a pile of little papers, like Post-it notes, and the evangelists are going through all these stories about Jesus, and they're, again, praying about it, but they also are trying to convey something about Jesus that they think Christians need to believe. And so they're going through these stories and picking the ones, you know, that confirm, you know, kind of go along with what, you know, they believe and what they want the people to believe.
Gotcha.
You know, and of course Matthew and Luke have an advantage that they have Mark. I think they have the Gospel of Mark in front of them,
Yeah.
and they are filling in the gaps. And Luke and Matthew draw from a common source because there's a lot in Matthew and Luke that are exactly the same, which meant they may have probably been drawing from a common source, and then they had some of their own. So what they're doing is they're taking all this stuff and putting it into a confession of faith.
All right, we have these 4 stories. Essentially what Rex said a few minutes ago is what the meaning of those 4 stories are. So what should we be taking out of those 4 stories that we haven't talked about?
That's why you want to come next week. Let's have a word of prayer.
So this
Great for a
Stay
commercial.
tuned for next week.
Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about the next week. In your name we pray, amen.